good morning. Thank you for joining. um, we are, we were trying out something a little bit different today and did a whole bunch of audio checks and then didn't actually test out how we were going to start the stream. So now we know that for next time. Cool. Well, glad you're all here now.
That's how we learn.
That's how we learn. Thank you all for joining. I would love to actually know who is here in the chat. So why don't you go ahead and say something. Tell me where you're joining from. We've got a bunch of people in the chat here. So go ahead and tell me what city you're in, what country you're in, and we'll see who we've got. Nice. Seattle. I'm in Portland, Virginia Beach. I don't have my own chat window here. I'm chatting as Okta dev. Nice. Look at that. People from all over. Yes, awesome. Mexico. Roberto from Mexico. Austin. Oh, hey, Matt's here too. Matt's a coworker of ours. Matt from Denver, filling in the map pretty nicely here. This is great. Andreas, good to see you again from Germany. I believe you were here last week. Morocco, wonderful. This is fantastic. Cool. Well, that's an excellent crowd. So today we're going to cover, we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about a little bit about what happened this week in the world of OAuth. Going to do a demo of, Micah's got a pretty cool demo cooked up, actually demonstrating one of the attacks that's been being talked a lot about right now in the OAuth group, demoing that and demoing how to fix it and how to patch it up when you're building your own OAuth implementation. And of course, we're here to answer your questions as well. So if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat at any point. And we will make sure we get to them. May not get to them immediately, but we will definitely be keeping an eye on the chat. So go ahead and whenever you feel like it, let us know if you have any questions. So Micah, what do you want to start with?
Why don't we have a recap of this week in OAuth, and then I can we'll transition into my demo.
Yeah, so this week in OAuth was the last of the scheduled virtual interim meetings. And this was actually the session that got tacked on at the end because we ran out of time during one of the other sessions to talk about one of the current proposals. So this session was there to make up for the time we didn't get to talk a couple weeks ago. The topic was Depop, demonstration of proof of possession, and that is one of the mechanisms, one of the proposed mechanisms, which is for avoiding the sort of less secure bearer tokens, which means that if a bearer token, it just means if you have the token, you can use it. So if you steal it, then the attacker can use it just as well as the legitimate app. So the concept of proof of possession means that you attach some other information to that token that requires the client actually sends that other information as well. It's usually some sort of signature. And there's a couple different ways to do it. One of them is called mutual TLS, which is not really practical in browsers or doing that in other kinds of clients where you can't like control the TLS client, so or the HTTP client. So Depop is a way to attach a signature that's sent in the HTTP payload itself, so that you can actually use it from JavaScript. And that is, yeah, it's a proposal. It's still being iterated on a bunch. This was another meeting to talk about, sort of get more feedback on that. And the session went well enough, I think. I forgot to bring up the minutes. I don't know where the minutes of the meeting went, but overall, I mean, people are pretty interested in getting something like this out there. But there's still a lot of work to be done on the details, of course.
So what's next for the working group now that you've cycled through these meetings? and I attended two of the eight. What ordinarily there'd be an in-person scheduled meetings. I forgot the cadence. Is it every 6 months or so that the
It's
group
like three
meets?
times a year.
3 times a year.
So
So are they already planning for another virtual set, or is it unclear right now?
yeah, so the next one was going to be in July because this was supposed to happen in April, or I think March even. So the next one's in July, and that now is going completely virtual as well. Um, that was going to be in Madrid, so unfortunately I don't get to go to Madrid this year. That one's totally virtual, so it'll be probably similar. I don't think they've actually announced what the actual format is, so we'll see how that pans out. The one after that's in November in Bangkok, which again would be super awesome to be able to go to, but probably chances are it's not going to happen in person either. But no, nothing's confirmed with that yet.
Right. Were there any kind of meta learnings from this first round of doing it virtually? I think it was 2 weeks ago, we had the discussion about what was working and what wasn't working, and maybe changing it up, maybe having it be one topic. Were there any kind of definitive learnings from that?
Yeah, there was a big poll put out on the list and during the last meeting about how people thought it went. And in general, there's nothing's official yet. The meetings haven't been scheduled for the next one, but it seems like everybody was pretty much on board with the idea of one topic per session. That seemed to work better. And trying to cram two topics into the session usually didn't work, and usually one of them got cut short, such as the Depop one that got its own session afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Yeah. So, other than the meetings, the work is now continuing on the list. So, the discussions are happening there. There's still a big discussion around OAuth 2.1 and security best current practice about how and whether and when and under what circumstances Pixie is required versus a suggestion, and how OpenID Connect sort of wants to play along with that world. So that's still an active discussion, and I think that was actually kind of what got us thinking about this particular attack we're gonna show.
Yeah, that's a good tie-in. So for people that don't know, there's been an ongoing and lively conversation about the role of Pixie in OAuth 2.1, and the security best current practice that came out last year speaks to the idea of using Pixie with the authorization code flow always, even for confidential clients. And that it was a little surprising to me when I first heard of it. I was kind of like, why? We have a client secret. But digging into it, it makes a lot of sense. And the conversation that's been going on triggered this idea for a practical application of an authorization code injection attack that is foiled by Pixie. So that's the way I learn. I like to see things tactically, and to see something that works on a confidential client without Pixie and then is foiled when Pixie is present, I think is pretty compelling. Last week,
the interesting thing about this is that Pixie was originally meant to protect mobile apps which don't get a client secret, and it's very clear to demonstrate why you need it in that case, because without a client secret, there's really no guarantee that the right app is getting the code. And you can imagine that there are many ways, especially in a mobile app environment, for an attacker's app to steal an authorization code, steal that redirect. So Pixie protects against that for sure, which is great. But what's interesting is that with confidential clients, it's also useful, and also for different reasons.
Right. Let me share my screen here. And so last week, I presented a diagram that looks similar to this if you were here, but it was a little bit different. Last week, I was talking about tricking a user into ending up in a logged in state for an attacker's account. And the utility there is maybe a user could be tricked into entering a new credit card, thinking it was their account, but now it's bound to my account as the attacker, and now I can go buy a bunch of stuff with that credit card. This diagram is very similar, except it's going the other way, which is probably even more useful from the perspective of an attack. And that is the attacker is going to end up in a logged in state as the target user. So just to follow this through kind of step by step here, we have these four actors in the corner. We have the target user on the upper left. We have the attacker on the lower right. We have Google's authorization server on the upper right. We have the legitimate website on the lower left. This is just a confidential client that's doing everything right with OAuth. And then in the middle here, we have this centralized attack server, which kind of makes us all hang together. So the key here is that the target user has been tricked into installing a malicious browser extension. And while that may be a not insignificant hump, you might be surprised how easy it is to get a web extension, a browser extension with broad authority listed on the various sites, the Mozilla add-on and Google Chrome extension. Turns out it's not that hard to get browser extensions listed, and browser extensions can have really broad authority. And there is a review process, but you take a look at the permissions that the browser extension is requesting the next time you install one, and you may be surprised. So that's our starting point. The target user has been tricked into installing this malicious browser extension. So the target user begins this login as normal. So they're interacting with a website. And what happens is the browser extension intercepts the authorization code that's returned and publishes it to this attack server. Then on the other side, the attacker begins a login with the same client as normal. Now that's an important part of the process, and we'll see why that is. But the attacker has to start a session essentially with the client, and then the browser extension retrieves this authorization code that was published by the target user, and then it substitutes in that authorization code into their own session and then follows that redirect. So what's happening with the legitimate website and Google seems to be completely above board. It's a good authorization code. We have a good session. We have a good state value. And so this confidential client will happily go and exchange that authorization code with Google. And when it's all said and done, the attacker is now going to be logged in as that target user. So let's take a look at the action.
That's the really sneaky thing here is that normally you would think, oh, well, you can't just steal an authorization code and go use it because you don't have the client secret. And that's the reason this attack works, is because you're not stealing the authorization code and going and getting an access token. You're actually stealing the auth code and giving it to the real client, where it then goes and gets an access token. So you're not stealing access tokens as part of this attack. You're just getting logged in as that other user, which is probably worse.
Right. So by way of example here, on this first screen, I have this user called Arub dude. And here is the browser extension. Now on the surface, this browser extension called Pretty Cats Nothing to See Here just shows you random pictures of random GIFs of kitty cats. We know something else. Now, I also want to take a step back and say I'm using PaperCall as an example here. If you're not familiar with PaperCall, it's a place where people that speak at conferences can list their talks and submit those talks to conferences. PaperCall isn't doing anything wrong here, but it turns out it's a good way to show this off using a real-world confidential client. All right, so we have our Rube dude, and then on this other screen, we have our Haxor dude. Now, the Haxor dude also has a browser extension, and its job is going to be to pull off that those authorization codes from the attack server that are going to be published by our Rube dude over here. So let's just kick off the process as normal. I'm going to log into PaperCall. I'm going to choose Google, and I'm going to log in as a real user that I have. I need to go and get that real user's password. And by the way, I forgot to mention the consoles that we're looking at in both cases, these are the consoles of the browser extensions, not the normal developer tools console. And we can see here that this authorization code was intercepted. And from a user experience perspective, our Rube user was dumped back to the front door of PaperCall, and they're not authenticated. Now, as a normal user, a busy user just going through your day, you might say, well, that's kind of weird. I just tried to log in. What happened? And the nice thing about this particular attack from, the perspective of evildoers is that if I go and try again, this time, whoops, all right, something got messed up here. This time it should have logged me in. Interesting. Yeah, there we go. So this time it logged me in, and that's because a new authorization code was created, and so Google recognized that I was authenticated. It sent back a new authorization code, and the browser extension is set up in a way that it'll let that proceed now. So from a user,
so the browser extension,
this user's logged in as Rube dude.
The browser extension keeps track of the fact that it already shipped off an auth code, and then it just sort of just stops doing that again, so it knows, so that it lets the user through.
Yeah, that's right. So it kind of switches state. It recognizes that it's already published a code, and so the second time through, it's going to let the user in. And now, if we were to repeat the whole process, it would then intercept the next code and then let them in on the next code. So, you might just think, there was some weird network hiccup. I'm here. I'm logged in. Now, because of that error, we might have got a little out of whack here. But let's see what happens. So now this code should be published. Now, if I switch over to our hacker, I'm going to log in also. Now, you might say, well, I already have an authorization code. Why don't I just construct a redirect URL with that code? I know what the redirect URI is. I have the code. And the reason that we need to start a real interaction here with Google is because of the state parameter. So we need to establish a session with Google in a normal kind of way, because the Google keeps track of that state parameter and binds it to a session. And if we just tried to use the code with the absence of a session, then the state wouldn't be right. So I'm going to log in as the Haxor. Okay, it still worked. Good. So what happened was when I started the session with Google, a redirect with an authorization code came back and the original state. And what this browser extension did was just swap out that authorization code with the one that it had from the attack server. And so now here I am. And by the way, I forgot to mention, this is Chrome for our hacker. This is Firefox for our Rube. So I just wanted to show nothing up my sleeve, no previously established sessions or anything like that. And now the hacker is now logged in as the Rube dude and can now go do whatever, change profile, go buy some stuff, maybe send stuff to a PO box, whatever you might do with that. And again, I want to stress here that in this context, PaperCall isn't doing anything wrong. I haven't discovered some, exploit that's particular to PaperCall. It's an exploit that is particular to any client that's a confidential client where you've tricked a user into installing this browser extension. So let me pause there for a second, see if there are any questions, and then we can show how Pixie defeats this.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty powerful demonstration. And yeah, it's pointing out that there is, it turns out, a pretty gaping hole in OAuth 2 itself until you add on a fix for it. So the state parameter was sort of the thing that was supposed to prevent this kind of thing, because like you were mentioning, the state parameter, you need a real state parameter from the client. The client generates it, so you can't just sort of trick it into accepting a state parameter. But that's turns out not enough, because there is no connection between the state parameter and the authorization code. So it's not actually preventing this attack. It's preventing you from just dropping into the redirect URL, but that's not enough to actually stop this kind of attack.
Yeah, and if I were to sum it up in a sentence, it would be like we're using a valid state parameter, we're using a valid code. They're just from two different sessions, and OAuth doesn't know that because there's no connection between them.
Yep.
Any questions showing up there in the queue?
Don't see any questions about this in the chat.
Okay. Cool. So to reset all of this, I'm gonna log out not only from PaperCall but also from Google, and then we're gonna kind of repeat this with a client that that uses Pixie. So let me do that in both places. I'm gonna log out. And one thing to notice here, I logged out of PaperCall as the Rube dude. When I go to Google, as far as Google is concerned, I'm logged in as the hacker. So we switched for the purposes of PaperCall because of that auth code injection, but I did actually authenticate as Google as a real account. All right, so let me just clear out everything here. And one side note I'll make is that this browser extension pair that I wrote also does the other mode of the attack that I was talking about last week, where you trick the Rube into being logged in as the hacker. But its default mode is what we're demonstrating here, which I think is the more interesting one anyway. All right, so so this time we're now going to go to this client that Aaron set up in about 10 minutes, which is pretty amazing, I must say.
Oh yeah, this is the one that doesn't.
Here.
This is not very pretty. This is a very bare bones OAuth client.
Yes, it's not intended to be pretty, but it is intended to demonstrate. So from here, I can log in with Google, and this kicks off the same flow that we were looking at with PaperCall, only this time it is using Pixie. So we're kind of doing the same thing here. We still have that same browser extension installed. And I'm going to log in as the Rube. Okay, and so, oh, that's interesting. It doesn't look like it was intercepted. Hold the fort. I'm going to make this a little easier on myself. Oh, I know why. I think there were already some code sitting there from the last run. So I am going to, first of all, empty the codes queue, and then I'm just going to restart these browser extensions to make it a little easier on myself here. Make sure we're starting with a clean slate. Bear with me one sec.
While you do that, let me answer this question here.
Yeah, sure.
So the question is, registering the redirect URL with Google is not going to help in this case. That's correct, because this is not actually an attack on Google. It's not has nothing to do with Google's OAuth server, and it doesn't even have anything to do with tricking the redirect, like a redirect hack, because we are actually redirecting to the real client. So what we're doing here is we're attacking the OAuth client that wasn't protecting itself enough. And so the redirect URL does match, and we are sending the user, both the real user and the attacker, to the real redirect URL.
Yeah, that's important. Let's see, did this one die yet?
Sky451 says, is the code available on GitHub? And no, the code is not available on GitHub. But
it is not.
It is not that much code, I will say. But obviously, don't actually try this on a real person. This is just for demonstration purposes.
That is a very good point.
That's a lot of console.
All right.
What's going on?
I have a few things going on. All right, so let me just get back to where we were. Okay, go here. Firefox and Chrome each do inspecting browser extensions a little differently. So I've had to get used to that. So I'm going to do the same thing here, just get to the point where we can see the console for the extension and not the regular developer console. Okay, back in action.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to go to our Pixie, our Pixie client.
So this is my OAuth client that is like, it's really just a few lines of code. It's just doing the OAuth exchange. So it's just doing it with Pixie included.
Right. Oh, and just making sure there's our browser extension. Hooray. All right. So similar to what we saw before, as an end user, I get dumped back into the front door, but in the meantime, the code has been intercepted. And I can't demonstrate this on paper call because the whole point here is that paper call isn't using authorization code with Pixie on a confidential client, and pretty much nobody that I know of is yet, but we want them to be for this very reason.
They're all going to be after they watch this video.
Right? So now this code has been intercepted. It's been published to the attack server. Now I'm going to go over here to the same thing. And just like before, I'm going to log in with the real account. Okay, now it attempted to do the same thing that it did before. It intercepted the code from Haxor. It replaced it with the code from our Rube, but it ended up failing here. Oops. It ended up failing here because of invalid code verifier. So in the case
of
Pixie,
Google, that message is coming from Google, from the token endpoint. So it sent the stolen authorization code to Google, trying to use it to get the access token. But because of Pixie means the client is also sending the code verifier along with that. And the code
and there's
verifier,
no way for my browser extension or anything to know that.
Right. The code verifier lives on this application's extension. And because it's on the server, it can't be extracted. It can't be intercepted or anything. And it's associated with the session of this browser. So there's no way to sort of like trick it into using the other session. So that is why it solves this attack, because Google is keeping track of the Pixie code challenge when it issues that code, and it knows what code verifier to expect when that authorization code is used. And now we tricked the client into sending the wrong authorization code, but the client was sending the Pixie code verifier for the other authorization flow that was going on.
Right. So the TLDR here is that a confidential client using the authorization code flow is not protected from this authorization code injection attack, but a confidential client using the authorization code with Pixie flow is protected from this authorization code attack. And so this speaks to kind of the conversation that's been going on in the OAuth working group. The conversation has been, well, if I'm using OIDC, I can just rely on the nonce. But
yeah, so let's talk about that really quick.
Yeah, sure.
So the conversation here in the group is whether or not Pixie should just become a default part of OAuth always, because it clearly protects confidential clients as well as native apps and browser-based apps. The reason that some people are suggesting that it should not be included as just a default part of OAuth is that OpenID Connect also technically solves this problem if you do a bunch of things in OpenID Connect. So OpenID Connect has this idea of a nonce, and the nonce parameter gets included back in the ID token. And if the client is checking the nonce, then if you tricked it into using a different authorization code, which you still can do with OpenID Connect, like you can still trick it into using the attacker's authorization code, and it will go and get an ID token from the attacker's user or the other user. So you're still vulnerable to like leaking user information, for example. But when the client receives that ID token and it checks the nonce, then it recognizes the nonce doesn't match, and then it would sort of abort. It would just drop everything on the floor, and it wouldn't actually consider you to be logged in. So you won't be able to get logged in as the user if the client is checking the nonce in the response. However, it would still get the ID token and the access token from the attacker. It just wouldn't then do anything with it. So the OpenID Connect method of protecting it is sort of like after the fact, and it's relying on the client to do the work of realizing that it's being tricked. So it's up to the client to say, oh, I recognize that nonce is wrong from this, it's not the one that I started with, so I'm going to voluntarily drop these tokens on the floor. However, with OAuth, I would argue that it's a much stronger protection, with Pixie rather, it's much stronger protection because it's the authorization server that never actually issues the token in the first place. So with Pixie, you're not relying on the client to voluntarily recognize that it's being attacked and do that properly. Instead, it's the OAuth server that is able to prevent it from ever being attacked in the first place. So that's the debate. It's which of these is a better one to recommend. And the argument on the OpenID Connect side is that, well, technically it's safe. If you've implemented OpenID Connect properly, you are technically safe if your clients are doing this verification. And because of that, we shouldn't make those implementations change to add Pixie because they don't really need to, because it doesn't really add any additional protection. And however, like you can see how long it just took me just now to explain this. And chances are you didn't get it in that first explanation. And I'm going to have to try again to explain it so that it actually makes sense of the specific conditions under which OpenID Connect clients are actually safe by not using Pixie. And, I just think it's a lot simpler to say, let's just build Pixie into OAuth 2.1 so that, and OAuth 2, because clearly there's a problem there too. And that is just the way it works. And if you are doing OpenID Connect as well, fine. You can also check the nonce parameter if you need to, but, Pixie is going to sort of halt the problem earlier in the flow.
And, I want to add, Aaron, that in our research and working on this authorization code flow attack and looking at various clients, right now it's the client's responsibility to check that the state parameter matches. And Aaron and I found more than one case where, well-respected websites and OAuth clients were not checking the state parameter. And that's a whole other problem. So, we have examples out in the field, real life examples where clients aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I would much rather leave it up to the authorization server, like we saw Google doing the right thing with the Pixie flow. And I'm a developer and I have been for a long time. I would much rather offload that responsibility to the authorization server and let them deal with the proper security checking there than make sure that every application I write or every library that I'm using is going to do the right thing. It absolutely should. It should be checking the state. If it's OpenID Connect, it should be checking the nonce. But like Aaron said, that's kind of after the horses have left the barn already. You're saying, you're trying to pull them back in, when in this case, tokens have already been issued.
Yeah, and I think in general, I trust Google's OAuth implementation to do the right thing a lot more than I trust every application that uses sign in with Google. And I would much rather put that trust there at the OAuth server to actually protect this stuff properly because, yeah, they have a big team. Usually OAuth servers are built by either very large teams, very large companies, or they're like pretty well-respected open source projects that have gone through a lot of peer review and vetting. And there's a lot more implementations of clients, and it's a lot easier to get that wrong because there's more people building them. So, so Andreas says, Pixie does not make OpenID Connect worse, even if the client checks the nonce, so why not use it by default? That will totally confuse developers, and often clients do not check the nonce. Andreas, if you do have examples of clients that are not checking the nonce parameter, please let me know. I would love to see those, because that is the exact point we're trying to make here, is that trusting client developers is a lot riskier than trusting the OAuth server. And the more demonstration of that, the better here. So yeah, like, honestly, it seems like it's better to go with. So I guess the real source of this sort of debate right now is that if you are doing things right with OpenID Connect, then you technically are safe. And there's this set of implementations, I don't know how many it is, but there is a set of them that are properly written and are doing things fine, and they don't want to then be considered non-OAuth compliant anymore because they don't have Pixie built in. Right. So that's really the actual argument here, is that existing OAuth or existing OpenID Connect systems don't want to be sort of told to change and add something in order to become compliant again, which is it's an interesting argument. But I am curious to hear opinions from you all here about whether you think that's a valid argument.
Yeah, and I would say, of course, I'm on the side here of it just makes total sense to me for Pixie, but also I don't see it as taking anything away from existing implementations. They are OpenID Connect compliant, they're OAuth 2.0 compliant, and they will continue to be as long as they exist. If they want to become OAuth 2.1 compliant, I think there's a strong argument to be made. Well, introduce Pixie.
Yeah, well, and this is whatever the outcome of this discussion will also become part of OAuth 2 if you follow the security best current practice. And again, like, you can just decide not to. You don't have to do anything, right? You can just decide to ignore the security best current practice. It just means that you're not the most secure. And if you've done your own research and decided that you are secure, even if you're not following that's fine. And so yeah, that's sort of the weird thing here. There's this question from Sky. So back to the demonstration of Pixie and why, and we were trying to show that how it solves it. The question is, can you somehow intercept the code verifier within the token request with the browser API and send it to the attacker server? And that's why this. So this is the sort of crux of the issue here. We've demonstrated that confidential clients are need to use Pixie, otherwise they have this problem. Confidential clients are where the code is running on the server. So Micah is writing code, it's running on his computer, and he's got the victim user and the attacker user on his own laptop. And then the OAuth client, however, was actually on my web server. So the OAuth client is the one that's getting the access token and sort of calling the user logged in. That client's on my web server up in the cloud somewhere. The request that my web server makes to Google to get an access token never touches Micah's browser on either the attacker or the victim. So there is no way for his browser extension to intercept that request, because the request is from my cloud server to Google's cloud server, not down to the browser. And that's the situation with a confidential client, which is an app running up on a web server somewhere. And that's why this is sort of like a dangerous situation, is because normally you think of that as a pretty safe scenario where you're like, oh well, random browser extensions and attackers can't just like fiddle with the code or like intercept requests, but you don't need to, because you just need to trick my web server into using a code from somebody else. And then once you add Pixie, it solves it. Now, the conversation is completely different if we're talking about a browser-based OAuth client or a mobile app OAuth client. And that's a completely different situation, and we should not go into it now because it'll just confuse everything. But in those cases, one, there's no client secret, and two, the OAuth client itself is running in the browser with a JavaScript app. And that is a whole different scenario with a whole bunch of different kinds of attacks and different kinds of threats. So we're not going to get into that now because that's not actually the scenario here. So yeah, single page apps have a whole host of problems. and attacks that you can pull off against them, and they need to be protected differently. And one of the ways to protect them is actually to not do OAuth in the browser and bump it up to a sort of helper server so that you're back in this confidential client situation. But yeah. Fabrice,
we come back. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to pull up another question, but go ahead.
I was just going to add to what you just said that we come back to this a lot. And if your mobile app, your browser spa app doesn't have a requirement for tokens directly, and you already have middleware or it's something that you could bring in, then that's still the safest footing to be on. So we might imagine when we talk to PaperCall and let them know about this particular situation, they might say, well, we're gonna add Pixie to our client. Well, that has absolutely no impact on anybody using their browser app. Nothing to change there. No, they don't have to release a new version of their browser app or anything like that. And so there's a pretty strong argument to be made for having OAuth done in a confidential client wherever possible. Now, it's not always possible. It always doesn't always make sense for the use case, especially on mobile. But where you can, that's the best security footing to be on, because when you do need to make a change, it's going to be easier to do it in that central location anyway.
Yeah. So Fabrice says, is it possible to do this attack with the Spring Security client? I don't know much about Spring Security itself, but the attack works against any confidential client that is doing plain OAuth without Pixie. If it's doing OpenID Connect properly, this is not a problem. If it's using Pixie, this is not a problem. But any OAuth client that is just doing regular plain OAuth by itself has this problem. Oh, and
yeah, that's right. So Aaron's client happens to be PHP, but it doesn't matter. This would work perfectly well if I whipped up a client. It would probably take me more than 10 minutes, but if I whipped up a client with Spring Security, this attack would work just as well with that.
So actually, Andreas chimed in. Spring Security recently added Pixie as an option for Spring MVC as a confidential client to make it more secure for this exact reason. Because
and not to brag, but that was partly our influence. Me and Brian Demers and Matt Rabel were kind of on the Spring Security team to do that because of the conversations that we have regularly.
Yeah,
with Aaron.
And I should also mention that you're watching this right now, and we're not this is not news. We're not breaking news here, right? We're not saying oh, there's this brand new problem that we've discovered with OAuth. No, this is a well-documented problem that is written up in many documents now in the OAuth group itself, and it's part of the security best current practice spec. This is all public knowledge. The community understands this problem, and that's why these discussions are happening. So yeah, don't take this as this is a new thing. It's just that Micah just happened to actually throw together a actual working demo of it, which I hadn't actually seen before. I would just sort of you walk through the steps mentally, and you can sort of understand that it could be possible. Then actually seeing it in practice is something very different.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. With this conversation that's been happening in the mail thread, nobody's saying this problem doesn't exist. The only conversation is about how to best deal with it, and the concern about having to change existing OpenID Connect implementations potentially to be compliant with the security BCP and OAuth 2.1. But nobody's saying oh, this isn't an issue.
Yeah. But yeah, that's so honestly, the more feedback that the group gets from people who are actually building this stuff, the better. So if you do have an opinion one way or the other on whether or not Pixie should be required as OAuth 2.1 and according to the security best current practice, or if you think that it's fine to sort of allow this exception for clients that are using OpenID Connect properly and have gone through some sort of verification of that, your opinion does actually count, and that does matter a lot right now. let me actually pull up a link so I can show you where to go to actually chime in on this discussion. I should make this a little bit easier to navigate to, but the OAuth 2. OAuth.net, that is the website. And if you go to this About page, there's this Community tab, and that's where you can find the link to the mailing list. So you join the mailing list here. This is the archives, and this will show you the discussions that are happening right now, which is, for example, that's an email I sent yesterday on this exact thread. So this is happening right now, and your opinion does actually matter. So feel free to just chime in. It doesn't take much time to send an email there. And there's no like sign up or a fee or anything. Like, it's just, go ahead and just join. Here's a question related. Will this attack be possible using OAuth 2 jar? That is a good question. So there's a couple of additional extensions going on in OAuth right now to make everything more secure. And we've got they all end in AR. So it's jar, par, and rar. Jar is JOT, Secure Authorization Response, if I remember the acronym correctly. Would that help here? I believe I would have to actually look at the details, because it might help, because the idea with the problem with the authorization code is that the client can't tell where it came from. Not Java in this context. Thanks, Micah. The problem with the plain authorization code is the client can't tell where it came from, and it just sort of sends it blindly. As soon as you turn the response from just a plain auth code into a JSON web token, then there is a lot more context in there available for the client to know whether like it initiated that request and things like that. So it probably does solve it, because I'm pretty sure they wrote it that way. But it would need to basically like include the state value, or no, something. Yeah, the state value would do it, right? If the state value was included in that JSON web token, that would solve it, because then you couldn't then swap it out with a different one, because then the state value in the actual URL and the state in the JSON web token wouldn't match.
Kind of similar to what Nonce does with OIDC.
It's very similar to Nonce in that point. However, that is, again, putting the burden on the client to protect it, and not then using that response. So even if so, it would solve it the same way that Nonce solves it, which is putting the burden on the client to solve it, which is still, in my opinion, not the ideal place to put that burden.
As a side note, some of these namings are a little unfortunate. Jar and rar both already have meanings in different contexts. So every time I see jar in the context of OAuth, I'm like, is somebody talking about a specific Java thing? And then I remember it's not Java.
Yep. So yeah, that's the sort of hot topics in OAuth right now. Any other questions on that? Otherwise, we can go through a couple of the questions that you dropped in the chat earlier. Actually, yeah. Why don't we talk about the this question about passwords? So here's it's a three-part. So we're building an online banking middleware server and a SPA and mobile client app. So we're not in the confidential client world, which means all the attacks we talked about don't apply. There's a whole different set of attacks. We are implementing the identity on OAuth and OpenID Connect. Great. Since this is considered a first-party app, why should we not use the password grant, ROPC, resource owner password credentials, or password grant, or however you want to say it? It has like 5 different names. Why should we not use passwords, instead use Pixie? So let's talk about that for a minute. This is a really tough one. So break down the question first. So the first party is the important part here. So the idea with first party means that the app that you're building is branded the same as the API it's accessing. So examples of first party is going to be like you download the Twitter app, you log into Twitter. You download Google Calendar, you log into your Google account. You download YouTube, you log into your YouTube account, which happens to be Google, but that's a different story. Third-party apps is what sort of OAuth was originally targeted for, which would be like you download, you go to the Buffer website to schedule a tweet for later. It then asks you to log in with Twitter to get access to your Twitter account. Two different companies, two different brands. So in a first-party scenario, you don't really have the sort of like trust issues, right? Where the user doesn't have to be sort of skeptical of the app. Whereas if you get dumped on a page and it says like, hey, this app is trying to post to your Twitter account, you are probably going to think twice about just clicking through because you want to make sure that you trust that app to have access to your Twitter data. And with the first party app, there isn't that issue. Like you download the bank's app from the App Store and you're like, cool. I mean, as long as you verify that it was the real bank's app and not like a fake app, you're fine. And there's no worry about giving that app power over your account, right? The problem with the password grant is that, and this is true with the password grant for any type of client, whether that's mobile apps, single page apps, confidential clients, anything. Problem with the password grant is the password you do in fact give your password to the application. So first, that's like never a good idea for third-party clients. But for first-party clients, you're not breaking the user's trust by doing that. So, okay. However, you have a bunch of other problems. So one, you're again relying on the client to do things properly. You're relying on the client to never accidentally log that to a file somewhere. You're counting on the client to not store it. You're counting on the client to use it properly. And again, if you've, audited all your code, that's fine, and you trust that, sure. So then the next problems are, well, you're a bank, so you probably want some sort of multi-factor authentication because, of course, you do. There is no way to insert that into the password grant. The password grant in OAuth is just take the user's password, get back an access token. If you want to start doing two-factor auth, you're on your own and you have to just make it up and figure out how to do it, which is not a good place to be. And the app developer has to actually build it into that app itself. So the advantage of using OAuth, and in this case it'd be the authorization code flow with Pixie because that's sort of the default now. The advantage there is that you move all of that work up to the OAuth server and none of your apps have to worry about it. So if you've got the web server, the web app, where people are going in the desktop browser, and you've got a mobile app logging into it, in both cases, the apps will just send the user up to the OAuth server, which is then responsible for collecting their password, dealing with multi-factor auth, and doing all that work on the server, so that the apps don't even see the user until they're done and they've got the tokens. So it's a lot safer that way. There's less there's less places that passwords are flying around, so there's less places that attackers can start stealing passwords out of. It's consolidating where all of that logic happens and where all the auditing has to be done. So, you only have to worry about protecting your OAuth server in that case and not also making sure that an update to the app didn't cause passwords to somehow leak out of it. My favorite example of this is Google because they are a obviously very large company. They also have hundreds, if not thousands, of apps that access first-party apps that access Google accounts, right? You've got YouTube, you've got Google.com, you've got Gmail, you've got Google Calendar, whatever their chat app of the week is, it's changing again, right? And all of those are built by completely different teams in Google, but they're all first-party apps. They're all Google's apps. But what they've done is they've actually said no app developers ever can touch passwords at all. Under no circumstances are we ever going to let our own apps ask the user for their password. Instead, we're always going to use OAuth. So every app you download, when you log in, you'll see the OAuth pop-up screen that's doing the auth code flow with Pixie. And it just simplifies so much because now they don't have to go around to all their app development teams talking about to make sure that they're handling passwords properly. They just have to protect everything on the OAuth server, which is another reason that Pixie is a good idea to use because that prevents that attack on the server side, on the auth server side. And now they can be a lot more sure that all of their implementations are actually safe. So that's the story there. And this is another topic of discussion right now, although the debate's pretty much settled at this point. The security best current practice is also saying don't use the password flow anymore. It's being taken out of OAuth. So if you read just OAuth 2.0 core, you'll still see it. But then if you keep reading all the specs in order, you'll get to the security BCP, and it says don't use the password grant. So that's one of the things that OAuth 2.1 is doing, which is never not putting it in there to begin with, because it just shouldn't be. So there's a question here from Andreas. It's a good question. Why was the password grant added to OAuth when OAuth was never targeted for first-party apps? The password grant's often used.
I love this answer.
Yeah, the password grant's often used by developers just because the redirect flows are more complex. And it's a fantastic question, because if OAuth was originally targeted for third-party apps,
right?
Yeah,
didn't you have a conversation? Yeah, tell the people this. This is great.
Let me actually pull up. I can go find it because it's on the mailing list. So we were having this conversation about 2.1 and the password grant, and here's this whole discussion about password grant. One of these from Dick actually explained it, and it may have been so long ago that I might not be able to find it, but I just want to pull out this quote because it was a very excellent summary of the situation, and it answered this exactly. So Dick Hart is one of the original authors of the OAuth 2 spec. He's actually the only one left on the document because everybody else dropped their names from it. But he explained on this mailing list, not going to find it, I scrolled past it. He explained the reason that it's in there at all. And the reason is because if you think about, you have to go back in time. You have to go back in time to 2008 era when APIs were just being built. And very, very often, people were using HTTP basic auth for their APIs. And the way it would work is the application would get the user to enter their password, the app would store the password, and then include it in the API request. So it would actually be, HTTP basic auth just sent up to the API every request. So the app had to store it in order to do that, which is obviously bad, which we understand now, which is why we have these token-based methods, which sort of avoid the need to store passwords. But that's just how things worked. OAuth came along, and the idea was that they wanted to give applications a way to upgrade to OAuth seamlessly. So the theory was, instead of asking the user to log in again, since the user was already logged into an app, when the app would launch this update to use OAuth, the application could use the password grant to convert the password into an access token so that they didn't have to bother the user, because the user already logged in. Why do they want to log in again? That was the reason. So it was there as a migration strategy to upgrade to OAuth. It's just that it kind of got written into the spec as a top-level option. So later, developers looking at it were like, oh, well, why don't I just do this because it's simpler? But that was never really the intent. It was meant as an upgrade for legacy apps. So that's why it's not being included. That's why it's not recommended. It hasn't been recommended for a long time. And that's why it's not going to be part of OAuth 2.1. So hopefully that answers the question.
So, I mean, if I could, I was just going to say to summarize, one of the original authors basically said it was never intended to be used the way it's been used. Is that an accurate summary of the conversation?
Yep, and I wish I could have found that email, but it is on the mailing list, so you can go find it. Yeah, so this has been fun. We're at the top of the hour. Thanks everybody for joining. I guess we will leave it at that. Come back next week. Do take a look at the mailing list. Join the mailing list. You can find it from oauth.net. And hope to see you all again next week, and we will be sure to continue these conversations.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one, everybody.